Hey everybody, welcome to Always Bored, Never Boring. With Christmas just a few days away, I thought it was a perfect time to take a look at a few ghosts of Christmases past. And wow, that's a tenuous link even by my standards. I am, of course, talking about the White Dwarf Apocrypha. And if you don't know what this is a ruddy, lovely product that Games Workshop released in the last few weeks. It is a compilation, an anthology of old White Dwarf articles, compiled in this really rather lovely 128-page hardback annual. And it really is like an annual. It really has that feel of, it brings back all those nostalgic memories of getting my Beano annual at Christmas. It's got that vibe to it, and the art style and everything. It's got that feel. And like I say, it is a lovely product. It is not a perfect product, but I have wanted this since I discovered it was going to contain some articles from 1989, which is a special year for me because it is the year that I started reading White Dwarf magazine. I didn't subscribe at that time, but I read my first issue in 1989, picked up a few more, started subscribing a little while down the line. And the fact there's a couple of articles from 1989 obviously makes this a little bit special. I think that's also possibly my one complaint with this book, is that there is nothing in here prior to 1989, even though White Dwarf actually dates back to the late 70s. That's not the end of the world. I think a few of the things they've chosen to reproduce in here are slightly odd, not necessarily the things that I would have chosen, although you can kind of see what they were looking at doing. They were trying to take examples that are representative of key moments in the evolution of the magazine. But I think I've witted enough. Let's take a look inside. When you first dive into this book, we have the contents there. I'm going to skip the contents because I'm just going to show you, basically flick through everything. But you get this little introduction, and check it out. We have here our White Dwarf that will be very familiar to anybody who has played Hero Quest. He's a cool looking dwarf. But beyond that, we have this really rather lovely piece of graphic art, which is every White Dwarf cover ever, starting way up the top here with the monochrome yellow. And if we whiz through these, you can see some really cool stuff in here. It's going to be really difficult, I think, to get it to come out on camera because they're quite small. But, we've got like a Hero Quest cover down here. There's Morcar with the gargoyle. I say Morcar, I believe he was called Zargon in America. You can correct me on that if I'm wrong. I'm sure somebody will. Let's see, where's my introduction to White Dwarf? Here it is. That was the first issue of White Dwarf that I ever picked up and sort of fell in love with everything that was Games Workshop at that point. However, it was much later that I started subscribing. I think if we skim through some of these... Oh, look. Content for Hero Quest and Space Crusade in the magazine. There's a bit of artwork, which was one of the Hero Quest expansions. I think that was the one that introduced more undead. I can't quite remember now. Right. Once you get to round about here somewhere, I was a regular subscriber. I remember having all of these in my collection. I think I might still have that magazine somewhere kicking around with that cool dragon artwork on it. I don't recall. And then we go on. And you can see the evolution of the design of the covers. It's quite interesting. Roundabout, I mean, if we go back, these are some of the best covers that round about this sort of era. So before my time, really, but those are beautiful. And then you can see where a lot of the covers started to have Lord of the Rings content. So you actually had photos of the Lord of the Rings guys and gals rather than actual artwork. So that was interesting. And then down here, they went through their white phase. They went through their white album phase. You can see they suddenly started using white background, and that continued for quite a while. Check that out. All along the top there as well. And then, obviously, a little bit later on, they went into their weekly phase, which we shall not discuss. We won't talk about the weekly phase. Interestingly, they do reference that in this book, the weekly phase. They don't shy away from the fact they did it, but it was dark times for White Dwarf. It was a problem era for the magazine. And then we go back into where... Here we go. This issue here, the mythical return of the full-size magazine with the Chaos miniature on the cover. The very rare, very hard to find magazine. And then we sort of get through to our current day. It's really interesting to see the evolution of the design, to see how they changed from artwork to photographs of Lord of the Rings characters to photographs of miniatures, back to artwork. And of course, if you're a subscriber now, you actually get full art pages for your covers rather than what you see here, and they haven't included those, so you get the alternative art. Interesting stuff. We get some testimonials from some of our favourite contributors to the magazine, like John Blanche gives his take on things, Guy Haley, Phil Kelly, all those chaps. And then we have just a cool photograph. The way this book is laid out is they have obviously sort of different sections from different magazines from throughout the years, and then it tells you down in the bottom here what magazine it was from. This was from May 2017. And then we've got some classic articles. We have The Battle for Antok Plains. I'm not going to obviously go through what all of these different articles are, but I'm going to flick through them because maybe some of these things will twinge a little memory for you, a moment of nostalgia, and you'll go, "Hey, I remember reading that article." We have Classic Heavy Metal. This is from 2010. So it's asking you to use paints that don't exist anymore. But it's interesting to have a little look back and look at those techniques of how they were painting the Space Marines. Gretchen's skin up here. Eldar. And this is, pretty much still how they do their traditional painting guides now, with the little close-ups showing step by step. No, there's a ickle face in that guy's cloak. Not nice. Painting freehand banners. Not something that I attempt to do because I'm not an artist. Some nice showcases of stuff. This really cool poster. They should have used Super Grippos for Super Grippo tires. That's from 1997. The launch of Gorka Morka. Something that I think quite a few people miss, and perhaps quite a few people thought Speed Freaks might be, but wasn't. We then have an example of chapter approved. This was from 1999 and has the rules for the last chancers. So we've got these cool little bios. And then this is the first thing that really made me want this book. This is A Gathering of Eagles. This is from the December 1989 issue that was my first issue of White Dwarf. And it's a battle report. It's one of the first battle reports. Not the first battle report, but it is a battle report that uses hand illustrations rather than photographs. And this really just fired my imagination. I pored over these little diagrams. You see the little drawings of the starting battle. You will notice that the battlefield is actually pretty much empty. There's 2 buildings up here and then an empty battlefield. Nowadays, a Warhammer battlefield is an absolute shower of terrain. There's all sorts of stuff over your battlefields in games now, but back here is just a basic open plain with a couple of houses. But I spent ages looking at these maps and poring over these details. And when I started playing Warhammer Fantasy Battle, I actually used to do my own battle reports. I used to draw I used to take notes of what happened each turn, draw the maps, photograph it, and then go down Boots and get me photos developed, and then redraw things. I was a proper geek. There was something wrong with me. But yeah, this was kind of formative in my love of Warhammer Fantasy Battle, this particular article. I won't tell you who won. More heavy metal, a little look at Dark Angels from 2012. And then another thing from 1989, just before my introduction to White Dwarf. This is the article on the launch of Space Hulk. Now, I've said before that I never got into Space Hulk originally. I think Space Hulk is one of the greatest games ever made, but I never played it myself when I was a child. And I think it's because, obviously, I missed the launch of it. And then my first sort of Games Workshop board game was actually Hero Quest. And then because of Hero Quest, I went to Space Crusade, and I loved Space Crusade. But then looking at Space Hulk, it almost seemed like, as a young, naive child that I was, Space Hulk looked a little bit like a backstep, because I'd been playing Space Crusade, which has the different squads with the different weapons and all the different alien types, because there's Chaos Marines and there's Gretchen and Orcs. And then suddenly you've got this other game where you just get standard Terminators with their Stormbolters against identical looking aliens. And I sort of thought, well, I've been playing a game that's much more varied and diverse and interesting than that. And yes, of course, I was totally wrong. Space Crusade is a marvellous game, but Space Hulk is a masterpiece. Fight me if I'm wrong. No, don't. So yeah, this is the launch spiel for Space Hulk, and look at this. Check that out. Oh, that's all the nostalgia happening right there. Looks great. Even that version looks great. Loved the little clip-on flamers you could clip over the top of the bolters to turn them into flamer units. That was cool. And then, of course, we have a section on the Realms of Chaos from 2010. You can't not have some Realms of Chaos. And this is actually a little look at the work of John Blanche, a fantastic illustrator. So, of course, we get a spread of some of his cool artwork. Like I say, I'm going to keep flicking through this stuff. We've got more heavy metal showcases from 2001. And then we have a modelling workshop. Who remembers modelling workshop? Look, full instructions for making a ruined temple. Do you remember when you used to make ruined temples out of cardboard and bits of polystyrene and glue, and you didn't buy plastic kits from Games Workshop that had all the bits on? I do. I used to make terrain out of all sorts of bits and bobs. You know, I was proper Blue Peter. I used toilet rolls, and I used to get layers of polystyrene and cut them into the shapes of mountains, and then glue them up to make like stepped ridges that my little units of fantasy battle guys would sit on. I used to spend hours doing that sort of stuff. I don't do any scratch building terrain anymore. I know there's still a lot of people that do. But they've got wedding cake toppers and they're turning them into ruined pillars. It's cool. Oh, it's all so old school. And then this is one of the articles that I kind of feel it's a little bit out of place because it's so new, I guess. But it's the birth of the Deepkin, the Ideneth Deepkin. And That's from, May 2018 when they introduced this new race. And I kind of get what they were doing with this. It was kind of showing the birth of a new race for Age of Sigmar. It's quite a big deal introducing a brand new race into a game, rather than just recycling the ones that we always knew and always loved. So yeah, I kind of see what's in there, but it feels a little bit too current, really. I would have much rather seen some more of the older stuff. But there's a couple of pages of that. The miniatures are cool for the Idoneth Deepkin, but I don't think I'm a big fan of the concept. I mean, it's proper wacky. It's true Age of Sigmar nuttiness, but not necessarily for me. We then go back to 1997 and we have this very cool look at the making of an Eldar Falcon Grav tank. So we've got illustrations and it shows the process of actually making the finished miniature. Some cool behind the scenes photographs. That's interesting stuff right there. All interesting. And then we've got this showcase of the painting of Richard Wright and Adrian Dyson and Steve Mussered. I'm sorry if I mangled that name. This sort of thing with the little boxes and the individual miniatures in each box, this is one of my main memories of the early White Dwarf magazines that I read. And these, again, were just fuel for the imagination for me. As a young writer, I used to pore over these pages and I would soak up the details of these little characters. I didn't really know much about the Games Workshop lore back then when I was a kid, but I would pick a character, one of these characters, and I'd craft a hero for a short story, and then I'd make the other characters around that character the enemies in my story, and I would write these little short stories and novellas and just not based in the Games Workshop universe because I didn't know much about the Games Workshop universe, but in my own worlds, using these images just to fire my imagination. It was a big thing for me. Speaking of big things, there's Nagash. He's huge. Never did like that miniature. And then we are into, look, the very first Tale of Four Gamers. And this was from 1998. And just flicking through this, through the Apocrypha, I got to this section and I looked at the little ranked units with the hero and stuff. And I thought back to my days of playing Warhammer Fantasy Battle where, you know, you would start out with an army that very much looked like that. One unit, a couple of heroes, maybe a war machine. And oh my goodness, I kind of wanted to go back in time and play Warhammer Fantasy Battle just looking at these images. Bretonians. This one in particular. It's just great with the Eagle Rider, the Tree Man, the War Dancers, little ranked unit of archers. Just looking at that, it was like, yeah, I remember those days. I had a small detachment of Wood Elves that I used to use in my Dwarf army. But yeah, all interesting stuff. I'm sorry, this video is just me flicking through a book and then yabbering on about stuff I used to do when I was a kid. I am terribly sorry. Like I say, Ghosts of Christmas Past. And then we've got Golden Demon stuff. This was from July 2018. Again, it just feels a little bit too current compared to some of the other stuff in there. I would have preferred some older stuff. Like I say, I would have really liked something from one of those very early monochrome issues. I guess that's just wasn't possible, but it would have been cool. And then we have, from 2012, we have the humongous Rinnsworld Battle Report. It's massive, and I think it had like 10 people playing this game. So there's that. Massive Orc force. Massive Crimson Fists force. And then the Battle Report. Very, very different to the Gathering of Eagles Battle Report earlier in the book. much more in keeping with what we see today in the magazine. Obviously, battle reports are still a massive thing in White Dwarf. One of my favourite things in the magazine, the battle reports, often because I just don't get to do battles on the scales that they do. I do sometimes wish they would do battle reports that were more skirmish level with smaller forces, but they tend to have quite large armies. But anyway, again, I won't show you who won that battle. And then we have this. This is very cool. I had never seen this before, and in fact, I didn't know this comic existed. I thought this was new for the Apocrypha, but apparently it's from 2004. And it's the Legend of the White Dwarf, and it's beautifully illustrated, and it's a very cool story talking about the White Dwarf, the legends of the White Dwarf and what he got up to. I'm flicking through it really quickly because I don't want to ruin the story for you, but it's basically got dwarf fighting Skaven, and while they're fighting Skaven, they are talking about the legends of the White Dwarf, and it's a very, very cool comic, and yeah, glad to have that because I had never read it before and did enjoy it a lot. It's not very long, obviously. And then we've got a big advert for subscribing to White Dwarf, because why not? And then right on the back, you can't finish off without one of the classic interpretations of the White Dwarf, although one of the most garish interpretations of the White Dwarf. But there he is, looking angry because he's a dwarf and he's got a grudge against everyone. And that's it. That's the entire contents of the White Dwarf Apocrypha. I paid £17 for this. I think the full retail price is £20. And at £17, I think that's great value for some really interesting bedtime reading. I got a little bit nostalgic a few times. A lot of it is from issues where I wasn't subscribing, or it was during the period when I went to university and I sold all my games, and I convinced myself that I was too grown up to play Games Workshop anymore. That lasted until I came back from university and suddenly went, why did I sell everything? I'm a fool. I've talked about that numerous times in my written reviews on Always Bored, Never Boring. If you want to know more about my misguided years in the wilderness. But yeah, so a lot of this content was stuff that I hadn't necessarily seen before, but it was very nice to see the Gathering of Eagles battle report again from that very first issue. And there's a lot of other cool stuff in there that made me feel nostalgic and brought back those memories of playing Warhammer Fantasy Battle, which it's been a very long time since I played Warhammer Fantasy Battle. But it's a good book. It's a really, I think it's a perfect gift book. If you know someone who is into Games Workshop and White Dwarf and you're not really sure what to get them, this is a really cool gift. And I do recommend it. I think it's a great book. Very nicely produced. A lot of the stuff in there is well chosen, I think. There's other things I think they could have included, but I liked it a lot. And that's it from me for now. Thank you very much for watching. If you have enjoyed this video, please consider pressing the like button. If you have really enjoyed the video, please consider subscribing if you don't already do so. And hopefully, I will see you all again very soon. Bye-bye, everyone. Bye-bye.